And item 6.1, proposed City of Emeryville charter.
So good evening, Mayor. Tonight is the second of two public hearings regarding the proposal of a city charter, as well as the content of the charter. Starting back in April, there were at a series of city council meetings, a proposed charter was prepared and presented to the council. And at the first public hearing held on June 3rd, the charter that met with the blessings of the city council that it wanted to see presented eventually to the voters was presented at that meeting, and that is the charter that's in your packet tonight. Again, as I say, this is the first or the second rather, of two required public hearings under the provisions set forth in the government code regarding the adoption process for a city to become a charter city. After tonight's public hearing on this item, there will be a special meeting of the City Council to be held on Wednesday, August 6th, at which time the Council will consider the submission of the question of becoming a charter city to the voters at the November 4th election. Likewise, at that time, there will also be a resolution regarding a proposed real property transfer tax. The charter, the proposed charter, as I mentioned, is attached to the staff report. The charter is basically very simple. The charter would provide the city with powers solely with respect to powers over municipal affairs in relation to municipal revenues, including taxation and assessment, and a system for the imposition, levy, and collection of a tax on the conveyance of real property. And further, the charter goes on to provide that except for these charter powers, the city would still remain otherwise constrained in accordance with the general laws of the state of California. That really is the heart of the charter. Again, other than with respect to the powers of taxation, the city's intent under the charter that it would continue to operate in the same fashion that it has for all these years. And for any changes to that to grant the city any additional powers would require a charter amendment, which again would have to go before the voters. So at this time, staff would recommend that the public hearing be open for the council to take any public testimony regarding the concept of being a charter, as well as the content of the charter that's before you.
Can I request, Mayor, that because we have two other items that relate to this topic as well, that maybe you could not close the public hearing until after we've considered those other items if there's additional public comment?
Yeah, that's fine.
Well, I would rather close the public hearing just, because those items aren't related to, or aren't required, I should say, in relation. But yeah,
oh, I see.
We certainly do want to hear those items in order after this one, though.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, so now we'll open the public hearing.
Excuse me 1 second. I kind of can't be in two places at once, so pardon me for a minute.
Okay. Anyone from the public who would like to be heard on this item? The proposed charter?
Is it for the charter city?
Yes.
I just assume there's going to be some staff discussion, but since it's a second hearing, I guess not. Is that?
You can speak now as part of the public hearing, and then when we consider the other items related to this, there will be another opportunity to speak.
Thank you. I don't know what the other items are specifically, but I'll just say this regarding the Charter City concept. Just for everybody here in the room, people watching on television need to remember what we're talking about here is putting this Charter City idea before the voters of Emeryville. So we're talking about letting the people of Emeryville decide about this democratically. And this is not something that's being put upon the people. Instead, it's the people themselves are going to decide. So I think it behooves us to let the people decide whether or not they think this is a good idea come this November. Thank you.
Anyone else to be heard? Josh.
Joshua Simon. I speak to you today as a property owner in Emeryville, and I just want to thank you for for going through the motions to put this on the ballot. It's really a very exciting change. As a developer who works in cities around Emeryville has been hamstrung in many ways that our neighbors have sources of income that we simply can't have. And as a former school board member, I was shocked at how much less our taxes are than everybody else. So I think even after the tax, my understanding is we'd still be paying less than everybody else, but at least we could afford basic services for the residents. And I think at the end of the day, having basic services for the residents and businesses of Emeryville will be good for everybody, good for the businesses, good for residents. So I thank you for doing this.
Thank you, Josh.
Anyone else to be heard? Okay, with that, we'll close the public hearing. Does council want to weigh in before we go on to the other items, or no? Questions? No? Okay, so go ahead,
Well,
Jennifer.
I'm never sure whether to make those comments now or because we have another item that relates as well.
We're going to move on to items 7.2 and 7.3. Do you can speak now or you can speak then?
Well, I just recall reading comments that were related to a blog post, I think, in our town, talking about how charter cities, there are lots of things that charter cities can do. And it's within the purview of the voters of that city to adopt additional items that are specific to that city. You have more power to do so by the voters. But it doesn't, the way we have constructed this charter city ballot initiative does not give, for example, a directly elected mayor, which you might see in other charter cities. It doesn't give other items that you might see. So it's just important, I think, for the voters to understand the content, and I think that's what we're going to dig into a little bit more of our charter and how simple it is to really keep things the way that they are, with the exception of the real property transfer tax, which is the revenue that Joshua Simon alluded to. So I just wanted to make sure that that's clear. Otherwise, things are staying the same. That's why we made it so simple.
That's right. Anyone else? Okay, on to items 7.2 and 7.3.
Yes, said change of PowerPoint, so I think I can't see is my problem. I'm sorry for that.
Time's up, Karen.
Yeah.
Oh, that should be it. This should be the the newest one.
What do you want? This is the agenda for this meeting.
Do this, but full screen.
Oh, there you are. Okay, you want me to start?
No,
Or are you gonna?
I'll
You
introduce
can introduce her.
Yeah.
There. Okay. Thank you all. Sorry.
It's always interesting when I have to be several places
We
at
found a
once.
typo at the very last minute. That's why all this
Okay.
complication.
When? Still coming up.
So, council, I just wanted to give a little introduction to what will be transpiring next. As many of you know,
It sounds like your mic's off. Yeah.
it's not working.
It's not working.
Is it working now?
Yeah.
Okay. So, as many of you know, that on
No,
March
no.
18th of
Bring this clear.
It's my day. As many of you know, on March 18th of this year, the council directed staff to initiate steps toward putting a city charter on the ballot, as well as a companion piece that would be a companion measure that would be putting a property transfer tax on the ballot for voter approval. You cannot, as a city, put a transfer tax on the ballot unless you're a charter city, and right now the city is a general law city, which means we're organized and only have those powers that state general law allows. So we began the process of doing that, and after this presentation right now, we will be going to ask the council for direction on putting those measures on the ballot for the November ballot. The council will not be able to take action until a meeting on Wednesday, August 6th, but staff is asking direction on the specific language and content both of the charter as well as the proposed transfer tax measure. So as part of this, what often happens is that to kind of determine public opinion and public concerns and public support for both the charter and the measure, because it is quite an undertaking to do so. The council also directed staff to engage the services of a consultant to do a citywide poll. And we have with us today Ruth Bernstein from EMC, who conducted that poll in May, and will be giving a short presentation on the results of that poll. And the results of the poll, I think, it would be interesting for the community at large to hear, but it also might help inform the council as it deliberates about whether to go forward with the next step of determining the specific language for the charter and for the ballot measure that staff would then bring back on August 6th for their consideration for placing on the ballot. So without further ado, Ruth Bernstein from EMC.
Thank you very much. I'll just take you through, we've pulled together here some of the highlights from the poll. We don't want to take too much time going through all the detail. It was a fairly short poll, but I'll walk you through kind of the overall findings and some of the numbers. So what we saw, definitely we see viability for these two measures. We see, as you know, we'll go through this, a little bit of confusion about the charter measure, but definitely as we explain it, voters understand it, and very strong support for both of them. So we do recommend that you move forward with placing these on the ballot, because we think there's definitely support in the community. We do see the tiered rate and no exemptions are kind of key components that we feel like you want to include moving forward. So what we did just on the, I'm not quite being mic'd. You want me to get closer?
Just a little closer.
I'll just get a little closer. So what we did, a telephone survey here among voters, randomly selected voters in the city. We've been polling here for a number of years, and as you know, we've told you this before. I think it's challenging to conduct a poll here because there aren't that many voters, but we do try to reach pretty much everyone. We were able to complete 151 interviews, and then we do feel like it's reflective. The demographics are reflective of voters who are likely to turn out, and you can see we've done other polling here in the city, both for the school district and for the city. So you can see we have some comparisons of old data. For instance, in this first question, do you think things in Emeryville are going in the right direction, or do you think they're off on the wrong track? And this is a very general optimism or pessimism question that we love to ask all over the state. And your voters are like the happiest voters consistently everywhere. And I know maybe not everybody in this room will think they're happy all the time. But we're amazed to see how consistent and how consistently positive this community is. 69% say things in Emeryville are going in the right direction, only 16% off on the wrong track. I can tell you that this is not the case other places. In San Francisco, in San Jose, where I've polled recently, we have just over a majority say things are going in the right direction, so in the low 50s, that's quite a bit different. And statewide overall, I think it's somewhere around 24% think the state is going in the right direction. So you can feel very proud of these numbers. I think this people in the community really like living here. And then also on a positive note, we do ask, using a scale of excellent, good, only, fair, or poor, please rate the following in Emeryville. And there's so much positive, we're only showing the positive here because there's so little negative. The overall quality of police services, 47% rate as excellent, 39% as good. As you can imagine, some of the neighboring cities do not get numbers quite this positive. The quality of fire services also overwhelmingly positive, 84%. Overall quality of life in Emeryville, 88% positive, 32% excellent. Overall quality of city services also very, very strong at 77%. And management of the city budget, 38% positive and 40% don't know. So it's not a lot of negative, just many people are unclear. And looking at this historically, as I said, we've been polling here for a number of years, so you can see we've been asking these questions about overall quality of life, overall quality of city services, and management of budget, and you can see how consistent these numbers really are over time, and that they've been consistently strong. Then we did ask a number of items. We said, how important are each of these to you? And one of the things we're looking for is, if people are going to approve an additional tax, we like to see where they think the money, not saying directing it specifically, but just generally, what do they feel like, how the city spends money, what do they think is important? And we see emergency services, no surprise, comes to the very top, 77% saying very important. Quality public schools, 69% very important. Maintaining open space and parks, sewers and storm drains, recreation programs for youth, bike and pedestrian safety, even the Child Development Center, very strong. Basically, the voters are saying all of these things are important. So then getting into the measures, we did read, we said, I'm going to read you some measures that may be on the ballot this November, and would you vote yes or no? And the first one is just, shall City of Emeryville charter be adopted to establish Emeryville as a charter city? Not a lot of information, so it's not huge surprise that 49% are undecided, say they're not sure. 34% though do actually, we get a plurality saying yes. So even with just that information, yes, and 18% no. But then we explain it. So we say, as you may know, some cities in California are organized under general laws of the state. Others are governed by charter. Cities that are organized under general law have less independence, while the charter may adopt their own procedures, municipal affairs, things like that, and explain kind of what other cities are charter cities. So after we give that information, we ask again, now how would you vote? And 71% said they would vote yes or lean toward voting yes. So you can see this is obviously a situation where we need to do a little bit of communication, but even with a little bit of communication, then the voters are saying, yeah, that makes sense. We want to be like Berkeley and Albany and Piedmont and other charter cities. Then we also asked about the transfer tax measure. And we said, to ensure funding to maintain essential city services, and you can read all of these here, all of these essential city services that we had just asked them about: police, emergency services, park, open space development, bike and pedestrian safety, child care programs. Shall the City of Emeryville adopt a real property transfer tax paid only by buyers and sellers of property at the time of sale, with all funds benefiting Emeryville? 67% say yes or lean toward voting yes, only 29% no. So very strong support for a measure, including the such as where the money might be spent. Then we do give some additional information about, we said if these measures together, if these two measures are supported for Emeryville, do you think these are convincing reasons to support the measures? And the strongest arguments are really about local control. These measures would create a guaranteed source of local funding for our vital city services that by law cannot be taken by Sacramento. all tax dollars will stay here. 48% say that's very convincing. Emeryville residents enjoy the benefits of our clean, safe, and well-maintained city. Because our police and fire services are top-notch, Emeryville is a desirable place to live. These measures will help maintain excellent public safety services. 46% very convincing. And you can see there's others here. It'll help to support youth services. We need this money because Sacramento, we've lost money because of redevelopment. All of these are all compelling, but really the strong ones being, this is going to be our money to spend locally in our city on the things that we care about. After we give this information on the charter measure, so again, we ask, how would you vote? So on the charter measure, we get to 79% yes. Now that's after people have been kind of trapped on the phone and given a lot of information. But and then on the real property transfer tax, we get to 86%. Again, after we've given them tons of information. But that is, you know, historically in Emeryville, we do see strong support for revenue measures. So what we see, we definitely recommend, our team together recommends proceeding with the measure. We think it makes sense. The measure, the way that we worded it, we think that includes the tiered rate, so that'll all be defined in the ballot book. We don't feel like it needs additional exemptions. And then using the language that we tested in the poll, we do think makes sense. And we definitely recommend doing communication. Obviously, the charter measure on its own, if we just say, will you vote on this, it's very confusing to people. And I think it needs additional explanation, not necessarily, you know, strong convincing, but definitely explaining what is a charter city, what am I voting on? And the transfer tax seems to make a lot of sense to people pretty easily. So we do see, you know, good numbers and very positive feeling from your community about this. And I can answer questions if you have any.
Questions from council?
Mayor, I just wanted to make one point, and I don't know if Ruth mentioned this earlier, but both measures would require just a 50% plus one
50 plus one. Okay.
right, majority. So
Thank you. Yeah.
just
Yes,
to
thank
put
you.
that out there. Yeah.
That was in my head.
Anything from the public right now? Does anyone want to be heard? Yes, please come. You have to come up to the microphone, so we're recording it.
I have a cold too. My name is Barb Singleton, and there was 2 pages on the website that I just read, and it said that the Lou Edwards group found that the exemption wasn't favorable. Could you go into that more? Just what? Sorry.
Oh, yes.
Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Anyway, this paper says that after talking to the survey.
Yeah.
Sorry, also found that exempting properties selling for under $300,000 is potentially polarizing for constituents, with 51% of them supporting the exemption, but 42 saying they were opposed. Why were people opposed? I'm just curious.
We can't speak for why, because we didn't ask that kind of question in the survey, although I can, given our experience here in Emeryville and the other numbers here in the poll, our assumption is that because there is very strong support for city services, that actually there's a feeling of we're all in this together, we should all chip in, and that it's not necessary to offer exemptions, and that when you do start opening it up to exemptions, it becomes, well, now who do we offer them to? I also feel like what we see in the poll is fairly strong support for doing this, and because especially the transfer tax is not paid, you know, by every homeowner every year. It's kind of a one-time thing, and that it is really mostly on businesses. So our sense from the survey is the voters just didn't feel like it was necessary.
Thank you.
Regarding the fee for the transfer tax that's going to be part of this Charter City and ballot initiative, I noticed that what's being talked about is structuring the fee so it's a little less than our neighbors in Berkeley and in Oakland. And I don't know what the rationale for that is, frankly, and there has never been a rationale, to my knowledge, put out for that. And I just think we should operate the way businesses operate, and we should just charge what the market will bear. And perhaps that's the modus for determining that we should charge $12 per 1,000 square feet instead of 15 as Berkeley and Oakland charges. But there's been no explanation of that. So I don't know how anybody's come up with the $12 figure. So if we're just going on seat of the pants or a feeling, well, I think we should just charge the same as Berkeley and Oakland, and that would be 15. So barring some evidence or there needs to be some rationale for charging less, I believe, and I'd like to see the rationality. I'd like to see the, just see a cogent explanation for why we should charge 12 instead of 15. So I would like to have that addressed. But other than that, I think it's a good idea, this whole affair. I think the people should be allowed to decide about this. Thank you.
Anyone else on 7.2? Okay. And now, come forward, Scott.
Scott Donahue, 1420 45th Street. Well, I'd like to offer a rationale of why 12 instead of 15. Our ratio of residents to business is unusual. We have a lot of people coming to our city every day. We can afford to charge less than our neighbors and still have a viable city, a dynamic city with lots of businesses. And I think because we can afford to do that, we might end up benefiting more in the long haul because we'll have more business activity. And I think that could be a good thing for us going forward. So the aggregate benefit to the residents could be greater. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Scott. Anyone else? Yeah, come forward.
Yeah, thank you. One of the concerns that I have about this real estate transfer tax for the city of Oakland is actually the tiered nature of it. I work as a tax auditor for the city of Oakland that handles Oakland's real estate transfer tax. And one of my concerns is that with this tiered rate, there may be an opportunities for circumvention of this by using things like split deeds, where you would deed 50% of the property at the lower rate, then next day put in a second deed for the second 50% and still stay within that threshold. So really that's my first concern about it. Also, I'm also concerned for our hardworking city staff here in terms of their ability to audit it and take a look at the monthly remittances from the County of Alameda to determine if that circumvention happens and all the other things that need to happen with looking at real estate transfer tax. By having one rate, you take that whole thing out of the picture. You can simply look at the taxpayer's preliminary change of ownership and with pretty good conscience know that they're paying the correct real estate transfer tax rate. That's really my first concern on this. I'd like to kind of follow it up on there is I would like to hear the rationale for having our rate lower than our neighboring cities. Neighboring cities are at 1.5% for $1,000 of gross receipts. And I think if we look at the median price of our real estate in the city of Emeryville, you look at that, we're right there or even above the city of Oakland. So I think that's the second point. Just as a suggestion to take a look as maybe as an alternative towards a tiered rate is something like a low and medium rebate in terms of the taxpayer or the buyer and seller pays the tax, and then if they prove to the city that they are low or mid income, they get a rebate of a certain amount of that real estate transfer tax. So those are kind of my concern about the tiered rate in terms of just the nuts and bolts for, the finance staff that does such a great job here and the rest of the city staff. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Any further comment from council before we move on? Okay, on to 7.3. Thank you very much. You're up.
Yeah, I know. I have to change gears. You might need to hit this every. Good evening, Mayor and Council. And so now that you have concluded the second public hearing, if just refresh your memory that in terms of the city charter, to be able to put on the ballot, there are some new state regulations that took effect as of January 1st this year, in which the council must have 2 public hearings, and then 21 days after the second public hearing, then that is when the council can consider whether to put city charter on the ballot. However, since this is the last date before the August 6th meeting due to summer break, staff is requesting that the council provide direction on the specific language of the proposed charter. And because there's also the interest in placing a transfer tax on the ballot, that we're also asking for direction on that as well. So the requested city actions, of course, then, as I said, is proposed language and ballot question for the city charter ballot measure, proposed rate structure and proposed ballot question for the real property transfer ordinance ballot measure, and then to direct staff, if you so choose, to prepare the legislation for consideration at a meeting on Wednesday, August 6th at 5:30 to place the city charter and real property transfer measures on the November 4th ballot. And the legislation includes everything from calling the election for ballot measures, directing the city attorney to provide impartial analysis, deciding whether or not to have ballot arguments and ballot rebuttals, and if so, what's the priority for which arguments would be placed on the sample ballot. So we'll start with the proposed city charter. In your packet is a copy of the charter that was first presented to you on June 3rd, and the public had an opportunity to comment on that at the first public hearing. And it is the same proposed language for the charter that is before you today. So I'll just briefly go through the charter. It is a very short charter. It is literally 2 pages, which was council direction to make it very short and simple and to the point. So I'll go through each article. Most of these articles are really just what I call, I don't know.
Boilerplate.
What? just
Boilerplate.
Yes.
Pro forma. Yep.
Boilerplate. And so Article 1 just establishes what the city's name is, and essentially just says, you know, it's still the city of Emeryville, and it's still the same boundaries as it always has. And the second one is where the city's powers, if it was to be a charter city, are what they are. And so it really says that the city adopts the charter powers solely with respect to the powers over municipal affairs in relation to municipal revenues, including taxation and assessment, and a system for the imposition and levy and collection of a tax on the conveyance of real property with voter approval. And then it says, except for those provisions relating to essentially the taxation and assessment subject to voter approval, the city powers are constrained by, subject to, and governed by the general laws of the city. So, with the exception of being able to place a ballot measure regarding the property transfer tax on the ballot for voter approval, all the other powers of the charter would be the same as they are now under general law. Of course, if at some point the public or the city chooses to expand those powers, they could do so, but it would take a charter amendment to do so. And a charter amendment has to go through the same process if the city puts it forward as the charter, which is extended public notice, 2 public hearings, and then a time of 21 days before that second public hearing and taking action to put it on the ballot. If the community decides to put on the ballot, then it requires a petition brought forward by 15% of the voters of the community, and at that point, then the council could place it on the ballot. So either way it goes, any powers other than this transaction fee, which of course itself will be placed on the ballot, would take the vote of the people to decide to do. So any of the things that were suggested, for example, by, or brought forth by Councilmember West, if there was an interest in elected mayor, if there was anything, if there was interest in public campaign financing, any of those types of powers would have to go through a charter amendment process. So the third article essentially says that the city still has the same property rights. It has the same contractual obligations as it did when it was a general law city, and that's important just for continuation of business. If there's any pending legal actions or proceedings, and of course all the city's ordinance and codes and resolutions, like our general plan or the zoning ordinance, they're still in effect. Nothing has changed just because we are now, if this this city charter was adopted. Article 4 just again kind of reiterates what was already the case. It says that the city would continue to have a council manager form of government, and that the council would continue to consist of 5 council members elected at large for 4-year staggered terms, and that the council's role is to establish city policy, and the city manager's role continues to be carrying out city council established policy. So again, just like now. So that is the proposed language for the charter, and I would entertain questions or comments or direction.
Well, as far as I'm concerned, the direction is to put it on the ballot.
Yeah.
The wording, we've been down this path before, we've hammered it out. The wording is there, and I would suggest to my fellow council members, we move this thing along.
I'd second that.
Okay, so the
Charter language.
yes. So the motion would be to prepare the legislation that comes back on August 6th with the language that is being presented right now. That would be the language that would then come back to the council for consideration of placement on the ballot. So you're not actually voting to place it on the ballot now, but just what language will be part of the proposed legislation to do so. So that is Councilmember Davis and Brinkman.
Can we get to these directions from the council after you've done your presentation and the public has had an opportunity to comment?
Sure.
Thank
Okay,
you.
we can do that. Okay. Do you want to, should we do the council, the charter? I thought we already had comments from the charter. That's why I was going ahead, but fine. Okay. So then the second piece of this is the actual ballot question that would be placed on the ballot. And so the recommended ballot question, and this is something that is recommended by staff, including the city attorney, would be, he's the one who writes the ballot questions for consideration by council to place on the ballot, is to enhance local control over funding essential city services. Shall the City of Emeryville Charter be adopted to establish Emeryville as a charter city with the ability to adopt a local real property transfer tax subject to voter approval? The City Council's powers otherwise remain unchanged and are limited by state general law, and any other powers as a charter city would have to be approved by the voters. And this is about 69 words, and the question can be no more than 75 words.
Mayor Asher, I have a question. This was exactly the wording that was used in the polling?
Not exactly in the sense that the polling didn't actually have a ballot question. It more gave some very general information about the charter that emphasized local control. But it's based upon the polling results, and it's something that the city's consultant that conducted the poll felt was in line with what the polling question was.
Do you have a concern, Nora? Or?
No, I thought though in the presentation from
Yeah,
the pollsters that they asked to use the
In the
same
transfer
language.
tax, it was the specific ballot question.
On the transfer
Yes,
tax,
yes,
okay.
yes.
Okay. No, this, I feel this is quite clear.
Yes.
And that we should go ahead with it.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Is that what you're looking for, Michael?
Or you want us to
After we
wait?
hear from the public.
After we hear from the public, okay. Yeah, I thought on this we had, but
Yeah.
I guess not. Okay. So do you want to do the charter? Ask questions from if the public wants to comment on this before going on to the
Let's pause for a
transfer
second
tax?
to see if anyone from the public wants to be heard at this time.
Okay.
Thanks, Karen. Anyone? Thus far?
Don't go away, Karen.
Yeah, Karen, you may have to come right back. Okay.
Okay, so do you want to, do you want to go through all of the actions at the very end?
Yes, please.
So then we'll move to the proposed real property transfer tax. I have lots of pieces of paper here, so. Okay. So for the for the proposed real property transfer tax, in your packet, there is essentially the template for the real property transfer tax ordinance. And again, most of the language there is boilerplate. And so there's really just two sections that council is asking for direction. And that has to do with the actual imposition of the tax. So it will be both the effective date, it will be the tax rate, and then it will be whether there's any exemptions to the tax. So those are really the three that we need your direction on. The rest is boilerplate. So we'll start maybe easy, we'll see. So the first issue is that under the section on tax imposed, the copy that you have now didn't actually include an effective date. And so what staff is recommending is that the effective date, when we bring it back to you in August 6th, that the proposed language includes that the effective date will be effective in accordance with the provisions of the California Elections Code. And what that means is that the ordinance, if approved by the voters, would be considered adopted upon the date that the vote is declared by the legislative body and go into effect 10 days after that date. The council is scheduled to accept certification of all the election results at the December 2nd City Council meeting, and then therefore the ordinances would take effect on December 12th. That would be really the earliest that this ordinance could take effect. Alternatively, the City Council could set the effective date as January 1st, 2015.
I would say just go with December 12th, if that's what
Absolutely.
we're allowed to do.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I guess the public's heard that, and we'll take a more formal,
Yeah.
this is more of a straw vote, right? Okay. Okay. So the next gets into the meat of the matter. And that the same section, now it's the actual rate imposed. So staff recommends that the City Council adopt a tiered tax rate as follows. And that would be for the first $300,000 of property sale value, that the proposed tax rate would be $8 per $1,000 of property sale value. And again, this is the language that would be coming back to you for August 5th. And that after the first $300,000 of property sale value, that it would be set at $12 per 1,000 of property sale value. And I do have a little background information that I'll quickly go through, and how much you want to dig into that kind of depends on, I think, on you. So here's some comparisons of other charter cities, and every charter city in Alameda County has a local property transfer tax. None of them have tiered transfer taxes. So they range from a low of $4.50 per thousand of assessed value in Hayward to $15 per $1,000 of sale value in Berkeley and Oakland. And I will say, having bought a house in Berkeley, that it is very typical that amount of the tax, the transfer tax, is shared between, it's part of the negotiation between the buyer and the seller. And I remember when we bought our house, it was a 50-50 split. So this is a little bit small, but I thought that there might be some interest in what does that actually look like? What does that actually look like? And so for an average, let's say, the average cost of a residential unit in Emeryville is about $300,000, and so that would be $2,400 of property tax. As I said, it's generally shared between the seller and the buyer at the point of sale. And I did that at the $8 rate. But what I also gave you is some other samples of what it might look like, including a $1 rate, just so you can kind of, if you wanted to, get a sense of what that might be if you added or subtracted from the staff's recommendation. Then I also looked at kind of what I would say is kind of more of a typical commercial property or larger value property. It's not a split roll with a different rate for residential, for commercial. It really is first thousand versus more, but there's not too many $10 million homes in Emeryville, and I don't know if there's too many $300,000 commercial rates, and so most of the residential sales will probably be somewhere between 300 and 400. I think the highest one I saw was about 600,000, with the commercial rates widely varying. And so for a $10 million property at the $12 rate, it would be $120,000. It actually would be a little bit lower than that because the first 300,000 is indexed, but the actual amount, it's because it's the differential, so it's a little bit lower than that. And then if you want to look at what would this kind of bring in terms of revenue, I looked at kind of what we currently get. Currently, the property transfer tax rate is what is kind of mandated by the state and the county, which is $1.10 per $1,000, of which the city of Emeryville receives half of that, or 55 cents. So I looked at the year of 2013 and through May of 2014, which is the latest that I had. And you could see that in 2013, for example, the city received somewhat over $40,000 in property transfer tax based upon the state mandate, kind of what we are able to do under a general law city. And if you look then at it was really difficult without going transaction by transaction to kind of look at first 300,000 versus not, but you could very easily look at residential versus commercial. And given that our residential properties are averaging about 300,000, it gives you a sense of what the first 300,000 would give you. And when we get to the commercial, you'll see that our commercial property sales in Emeryville vary so much that they average 1 or 2 sales per month. But actually there were several months there were no sales at all. Mm-hmm. So it really is difficult to get a sense of what that first 300,000 would be, because and it also depends on the amount of the property. I mean, if it's a large property sale, it's such a small amount of what that rate is that first 300,000, that for the purposes of, I think, making a policy decision, unless you direct us to bring you back more, I think this gives you kind of a sense of it. So so the proposed lower tier for the first 300,000 that staff is proposing would have last year brought close to $600,000 in property sales, as opposed to the $40,000 that we received. And to date, we would have the city would have generated $735,000 for that first 300,000, so to speak, as opposed to the 50,000 that we've generated through May. And again, as I said, commercial property tax is so variable. I have a slide that I didn't put as part of the presentation, but I could bring back, that you saw before, that we had 1 year that commercial property sales was 70 million in 2010, and then I think like 2 years later it was almost 1.2 billion. So it's a huge fluctuation in commercial, and it makes it very difficult, I think, for the city to consider budgeting that as for operational money. But kind of residential, it's kind of what I call the bread and butter transactions. It's going to happen. So that gives you some sense of what that is. And I also then did it at the $1, so you could get some sense of what the variation would be in terms of revenue impact. And then, because you might want to talk about these together, the other issue in the same section on tax imposed is what's called a de minimis exception. And if you have any questions about that, I am definitely going to bow to our city attorney. But essentially, staff is recommending that there is an exception for sales under 100. It's under tax rate, it's not under exceptions. And that what it is for those sales that are under $100. These are typical, I would say, from what I have been hearing, for transfers between, let's say, a parent and a child, that rather than waiting for something to go through probate after the parent's death, that there's a, while we're still living, I will transfer this property to you, but to make it a sale, there's a small de minimis monetary amount that is part of that transaction. And you certainly could not make that exception, but for the $100, you're talking about 80 cents and just the administration fee, the administrative cost of having to process a 80-cent transaction fee doesn't seem to, in staff's recommendation is to not do that. And this is purely for those, really, it's just exchanging hands rather than going through probate type of deals. But you don't have to do that, so that would be option 2. And then the other section that we're requesting direction on are the sections regarding exceptions or exemptions. And most of these sections, 3.3-3705 through 3.3710, are all statutory exceptions, ones that you have to do. Again, I'll bow to the city attorney to get more into that, but it has to do with, for example, foreclosures, that type of transactions. The state prohibits transaction fees being placed on those kinds of transactions. But there is one, I would say, I guess, discretionary or policy-based exemption that staff is recommending, and that is exempting transfers that are within our restricted affordability units, and to not place the transfer tax on that, as that would be just an added burden on the affordable housing program that we have, that either the city would end up providing additional money for, or the low-income buyer would have to come out of pocket. So we are suggesting that, we are recommending that that be the sole exemption, other than that is statutory.
Karen, is all this verbiage going to go on the ballot?
No. We will get to the ballot question.
All right.
Oh, it'll be the ordinance, and then there'll be a summary of the ordinance. But the ballot question will again, it's limited to 75 words, and there it is. It's to ensure funding to maintain essential city services, and some examples are given. Shall the city of Emeryville adopt a real property transfer tax paid only by buyers and sellers of property at the time of sale, with all funds benefiting Emeryville? That's the question. But the full ordinance.
This was the one that was read during the poll.
Yes, this was the exact.
And that received such
the 89%
okay.
favorability rating. This is the exact language that was used for that poll.
So this will be on the ballot?
On the ballot.
All right.
In the ballot, what do you call it? The ballot, the sample ballot, there would be a summary of what is, several pages for the entire ordinance, and then the ordinance itself would be attached. So the kind of detail that we're asking you for would be part of the ordinance, that would be part of the ballot pamphlet, and there'd be a kind of an executive summary of that also.
But this is the only thing that will be on the ballot itself?
Yes.
This question?
Yes.
All right.
Okay.
So we can go back up to, so we're asking, I don't know if you want to have some discussion first before you have public comment on the transfer tax, and then kind of go through the whole thing, whatever is your pleasure.
Does anyone
Mayor
have
Asher.
questions for Karen, and then we'll hear from the public very quickly? No? Let's go ahead and hear from the public then.
Okay, so I'm going to just put kind of what the actions are, and then I can go back and forth if needed.
Okay, thank you, Karen. Sure. Anyone to be heard on this item?
Bill Reuter,
Take notes for this.
citizen. I'm interested in the problems that might result from a split tiered, that is the de minimis exemption clause. A point raised by a previous speaker, I think had some knowledge of that process being operated in the city of Oakland. Let me ask the staff and the city attorney, any worries or concerns that that system might be gamed by people transferring property?
Do you have an opinion on that, Mr. Biddle?
Well, I can never predict what people are going to do. But I don't think it has to do with the de minimis exemption. That is just really to essentially exempt the first $100,000 of value so that you allow for, transfers, gift transfers from family members. Sometimes also.
You mean 100, not 100,000, I think.
Did I say 100,000? Sorry, $100.
Had me worried. Okay.
And then also sometimes deeds are done to clear up title. Sometimes you might, a young family might buy a home and their parents had to be on title with them to qualify, and then after a while they, the parents get off title, so there's a deed. So, and then you just show that there was consideration of $1 or $10. So we're not intending to address that. But in terms of the split, tax amount, whether people are going to try to game that by preparing two different deeds to transfer a partial interest one time and then another. I suppose you can have people trying to do that. I can't say I've ever seen that. Of course, we haven't had the experience of actually administering a transfer tax. Perhaps Sabrina, who's been in Oakland, maybe she has some experience.
Do not have a tiered rate.
Right. Right. Most jurisdictions that you saw in Alameda County, and then also of various ordinances that we've looked at in terms of crafting the ordinance, most jurisdictions do not appear to have a tiered rate such as that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you.
Hi, Judy Timmel, resident. I'm concerned about the tiered rate. I think that we've seen from many examples here in Emeryville how, for example, Pixar appears not to be doing any business in Emeryville now. They're doing it all in Southern California to avoid taxes. I can see that this would happen with regularity, that people would try to avoid wherever possible, not necessarily someone selling their home to someone, but in the case of businesses. So I don't see why I can understand wanting to exempt people with lower cost housing, but I think it would create a lot of issues and problems for the staff, and shouldn't be done. Thanks.
Thanks, Judy.
Yeah, I would also like to join with the two previous speakers who expressed some concern regarding the tiered option. I listened to the gentleman from Oakland who spoke, and frankly, it sort of spooked me a little bit. And we have, as Ms. Timmel just noted, we have seen this city be hoodwinked by clever attorneys working for billion-dollar corporations in the past. I mean, to see that this started sort of happening because of unintended consequences from this good intentions of the tiering idea would be, cause a lot of cynicism, cause a lot of distrust in government and disgust in government. And since no other cities around are doing it, I think you should strongly reconsider, if it's not too late. I mean, if I would not want any change on this regard to negatively affect the whole program, but insofar that you can reconsider the tiered idea, I think you should try to do that with little time you do have left. And then once again, I would like to say the $15 rate per $1,000 is the rate I think we should charge, because we are sandwiched in between those two cities, and we have not. It doesn't seem to be any rational basis that has been presented for us to charge only 12, and without a rational basis, I think we should just charge what other cities charge, and that seems to be more rational, barring some explanation for the 12. Thank you very much.
Yeah, hello again. First things first, I'd like to clarify my comments for just a moment here. I don't want to say that anybody would game the tiered system. I've never worked under a tiered system, so I don't know how it would be administered and work in the real world. It's just one of those things I took a look at as a possibility of being an unintended consequence. I don't know if that's going to be a fact or not. Really, my overall concern on this is that, first, I'm very much for a charter city and a real estate transfer tax, what the revenue that can provide for local cities and my personal city. It's huge for me. I'm just here to kind of make sure it's done right. And, you know, for example, making sure that the rate is done right, because we know how difficult it is to increase the rate after we actually get it passed once. Also making sure, and I know staff's working on it, they do a great job here, looking for a lot of these possible loopholes, for example, possibly on the tiered rate. My last comment that I do want to bring up is to take a look at actually what a transfer tax is, and that if the city of Emeryville puts it just on the buyer and seller, that may not capture things like mergers and acquisitions. And I haven't read the language in the bill. It does, yeah, and that was one of the things that I really wanted to make sure that was a huge loophole that City of Oakland went through. So I just kind of want to clarify my comments, and once again, just I know the staff's doing a great job here going through it and everything else. Thank you.
Thank you. Other comments from the public?
Joshua Simon, I just wanted to put some numbers to this because that always helps me with decisions. So the difference between the 12% and the 8% is about 4%. That comes out to about $12,000 on a $300,000 sale. So it means that, you know, the difference would...
1,200.
Yeah. 1,200, thank you. even better. So we're talking about a small amount for the taxpayer, but I think we're talking about simplicity for city staff and simplicity for, and I'm glad city staff is very good with the numbers. So I just want to encourage simplicity and encourage uniformity, but I also like the idea of having some process for hardship, because there might be some, and I know that when we did the parcel tax for the schools, we had an exemption for seniors, but I think having some sort of process for, you know, if there's a public benefit, to have an ability to come back, and I think that could possibly be done as follow-on legislation. I don't know if that's needed within this, but there are rare cases where there are public benefit transfers where the tax actually has an impact, and having an ability to come to the council and ask for a rebate of the tax under specific public benefit situations might be of value.
Anyone else to be heard? No? Okay, can we have the questions back up?
No.
Here. Thank you.
So that was it, multiplicity? Okay. I'm going to go up to the beginning because you might want me to scroll down.
Busy.
Okay.
Okay.
So the first question, if I would suggest maybe dealing with the city charter, because that really undergirds anything later.
I'd like to move the language that we already have.
I'll second that.
Okay.
The longer with the explanation included.
Yeah.
That we were shown. I approve of that as well.
Yeah.
Okay, so that is for, well, one, I guess, is it for the proposed language and ballot question
And for the ballot question.
as presented today?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Anyone opposed? Laura, you okay? Yeah. Okay.
4-0?
Yep.
Okay. So that's for the charter, language, and question. Okay. Now we can go to the real estate transfer tax. So then I guess we'll start first with the effective date. And so the staff was proposing as soon as possible, which would be the December 12th date, which is essentially following election code. Alternatively, you could set it as January 1st. I mean, you could do something else as well, but those
I
seem to be.
propose December 12th.
Yeah, and I assume that if for some reason there was a hookup and we couldn't accept certification of the election results at the December 2nd meeting, it would then be delayed to the next meeting or something.
The word would be effective according to the provisions of the Elections Code. Okay. And so that December 2nd meeting, I think, is technically maybe 29 or 28 days, and the Register of Voters has a full 30. But the likelihood that it would take the full 30 days to certify Emeryville's elections are
Minimal.
pretty small.
The only problem is there's some amount of uncertainty, and I know when we come into financial matters, it's nice to have certainty. So I've just put that forward.
The default would be is that if for some reason it was the December 16th meeting, which would really be the latest meeting that would be, then the effective date would be 10 days after that, because what will be in the ordinance will be with the provisions of the election code, and that part of the election code says that it's upon the date that the vote is declared by the legislative body and 10 days after that.
So my concern is that this is what is published as all the extra information for the voters, I assume. It's in the booklet, and it has the full language from the ballot measure. Is that correct? And there wouldn't actually be a date there.
No, the dates wouldn't be here. This what's in the light blue is essentially what would be in there. That the effective date is that's in the provisions of the electric code. That would be what would be in the ordinance. This is just explaining what was in the code.
I understand. And what I'm saying is that when someone reads what's in blue there is no date.
No.
It's just confusing. You have to know a lot in order to know when this takes effect. And so I'm just saying, in the interest of clarity,
I see what you're saying.
If you actually put in, January 1, which is all of, 2.5 weeks later, people could look at it and say, oh, I know when this takes effect. If someone's selling their property, they don't know what that blue one means.
I agree.
So you're saying the alternate.
I
was not following you.
I'm sorry. So I'm saying I think it's a little confusing to have all the language and having it tied to the elections code rather than just having a date for people.
Yeah, I agree. I think January 1st makes sense. That's when most laws go into effect, and so people just relate to that date. So I think it's a lot cleaner to establish that date.
Motion and a second and a vote?
Yeah, I'll move the January 1st, 2015.
I'll second it.
Anyone opposed?
I'm opposed. I want to go for the 12th.
I want to go on the 12th too. I don't think that people are concerned about when the date is. That
then why don't you guys just make it January 1st if you're not concerned?
No, I don't think that voters are concerned. I don't think not having a date is going to sink this.
Think of all these people that do things for tax reasons before January 1st.
Exactly, and that's what I'm thinking.
They'll do it before December 12th too. So
there's no way we could put the date December 12th because that's not a guaranteed date, correct?
How about you could put the earlier of January 1st, 2015, or that as established by California Elections Code 9217.
Good weasel words. That's great.
That would be fine with me.
I'd support that.
There's some date, but it can be the 12th.
It'd be the earlier of those.
It would be the earlier of those. Okay. Yeah, I'll support that.
I'll support that too.
Okay. We're all in agreement.
Election code for January 1st. And motion second by
I'll make the motion.
Okay.
Second, Davis.
and Wes.
Sure.
That vote?
Is 4-0, it sounds
Yeah,
like.
it is.
4-0.
I'm trying to make notes of this.
I know.
That's
We
okay.
know.
That's why Ken's videotaping back there.
Somebody give Ken $10.
Yeah. You do owe him $10 tonight, Kara. It's your night to pay.
This is going to be, this is being on ETV as well as streamed live and archived and timestamped. And that will be available to the public in archive starting tomorrow. And it will also be rebroadcast on ETV, I think at least two or three times this week.
Moving along.
Okay, so Then it's a matter of the tax rate, tiered or not tiered, and what the actual dollar amount
I
is.
propose we eliminate the tier.
I second that.
Go straight with $12.
I'm in support of that.
I would too.
You got a winner.
So 12, no tier?
Yep.
Okay.
And that's roughly, I think, Sabrina, it can be about a 10% increase in our general fund, depending on the year.
Yeah, close to
What we can look at really closely
properties.
Depending on, yeah.
Depending on, it's like,
But just to clarify, we probably cannot budget for that, just.
oh, no, I'm not, yeah.
Okay, crap.
And to change that tax rate from $12 would mean going back to the voters.
Yes.
Correct.
That's right.
So if you see at the very end here, and I don't know how I get back to having the big screen.
That's okay. Ken.
Okay, is that I do have for $12 what it would have been during the various years, and that's in your packet.
Yeah.
So for the low year, it would have been 845 compared to less than 39, and the highest year, it would have been almost 13.5 million compared to 600,000.
Yeah.
Okay,
A step in the right direction.
step in the right direction. And I don't know what just happened to my computer screen, but we'll deal with it. Okay, and then the next is the ballot question. So I think that's all we need to know about then the de minimis exception.
Questions, motion?
I don't have a strong feeling about this.
Oh, neither
It
do
seems
I.
like the rest of council doesn't either. If it's not, I mean, in some ways it's more complicated to put the de minimis in place. In other ways, it's less administrative burden for small things. So
I think it's an administrative burden, and I hope we don't proceed with this.
Okay.
that's fine with me.
We're not talking about a lot of
No.
impact or money on the individuals.
And it probably is very few properties per year that would fall under this as well.
So staff recommendation or option 2?
They said
I heard
without.
option 2.
Is that what you were moving?
Absolutely.
Yeah, okay.
And did you make a motion or?
I'll make a motion.
Okay, I'll second it.
All right.
Anyone opposed?
No.
No. Okay.
Okay, and then
Affordable
yes,
housing.
the affordable, right, I was
Affordable
just trying
housing
to
exemption.
get to that. Yes, that one.
Yes.
So the other one would be exempting
Second.
affordable,
I make the
those
motion.
units that are within the city's
Second.
affordable housing program.
Okay.
Seconds. Anyone opposed? No.
Okay. And with the exception of the statutory exceptions, then that would be the only other exception. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes.
That's correct.
Yes.
Great, okay. And then the ballot question, and this is the one that was,
Yeah, I'll move that ballot question.
Second.
Second.
Third.
Anyone opposed? We got it. Okay.
ballot question. Okay. And so then the only other thing remaining is for direction regarding, I would assume the answer is yes, but just to ask, that we then, that you're directing staff to return at a meeting on Wednesday, August 6th, with all the legislation necessary, all the draft legislation necessary.
So moved.
Second.
The rate is $12 with no tier.
$12. We just,
what
we
said.
voted.
With no tears.
No tears.
And I just want to point out to the public, it's a Wednesday. We don't normally meet on Wednesdays, but
August
we are
6th.
meeting Wednesday, August 6th at 5:30.
That was a motion by Councilmember Davis and a second by
Asher.
Usher. Anyone opposed? No.
put on ballot, or get ready to put on the ballot.
Yes.
So we will bring back for the Wednesday, August 6th agenda, all the legislation to put both the city charter and the proposed transfer tax of $12 per 1,000 of sale value. We'll put that on the agenda for your final consideration and action.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Uh-huh. Did you want to be heard, Colleen, or no?
Just to, Colleen Crowley from the Lou Edwards Group, I believe we needed to make an adjustment to the ballot question if...
It's okay.
It's okay?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, thank you, Colleen. Okay, all right, now wending our way back